The old man who waited 40 years on the same porch. The sun set in real pretty tonight, ain't it? Kinda reminds me of all those evenings I spent watching that same old oak tree sway in the breeze. Yep, I reckon some stories just take time to unfold, like a good whiskey that needs years to reach its perfect flavor. This here story I'm about to tell you happened many seasons ago, back when my beard wasn't this silver and my bones didn't creak with every step. It was the summer of 1965 when I first laid eyes on that old wooden house at the edge of Willow Creek. Not much to look at, truth be told, weathered clapboard siding, a tin roof that had seen better days, and that front porch. Lord, that front porch would change my life in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. I was just passing through town, you see. 25 years old with nothing but my daddy's old pickup truck, a duffel bag of clothes, and about $63 to my name. War had just started heating up overseas, and I'd been drifting west, looking for something I couldn't quite name. That dusty road led me straight into Willow Creek, population 506 according to the faded welcome sign. Typical small town, one diner, one gas station, one bar where the same fellas probably sat on the same stools every night telling the same stories. The kind of place most young men my age were running from, not to. My truck started making a mighty peculiar rattling sound just as I passed the town square. Before I knew it, smoke was billowing from under the hood like an angry thundercloud. I managed to coast into Miller's auto shop, where old Frank Miller, rest his soul, gave me the kind of news no traveler wants to hear. Gonna need a new transmission, son. Parts'll take at least a week to get here, he said, wiping grease from his hands onto an already stained rag. Now, I didn't have enough cash for a motel stay that long, and Frank mentioned the boarding house in town was full up with some family reunion. That's when he told me about Miss Eleanor's place. Old widow woman out on Cedar Lane, he explained. Got a room she rents out sometimes. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and she makes the best darn biscuits this side of the Mississippi. That's how I found myself walking up the dirt path to that particular house with the crooked mailbox that read Winters in faded black paint. And there she was, Eleanor Winters, 65 years old, white hair pulled back in a neat bun, sitting on that porch in an old rocking chair, shelling peas into a metal bowl. Afternoon, ma'am, I called out, hat in hand like my mama taught me. Frank Miller from the garage sent me. Said you might have a room available? She looked me up and down with eyes so blue they reminded me of summer skies back home. You running from something or to something, young man, she asked, her hands never stopping their work with those peas. The question caught me off guard. Ma'am? In my experience, men your age moving through towns like this are usually doing one or the other, she said matter-of-factly. I thought about it for a moment. Guess I don't rightly know the answer to that yet. A smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. Well, at least you're honest. Room's $10 a week, includes breakfast and dinner. No drinkin', no cussin', and you help with the chores. Church on Sundays ain't mandatory, but it's strongly encouraged. And just like that, I became Miss Eleanor's boarder. The room was small but comfortable, up in the attic with a window that faced west, giving me a perfect view of those spectacular country sunsets. I figured I'd stay the week, get my truck fixed, and be on my way. Funny how life has other plans sometimes. The first morning, I came downstairs to find Miss Eleanor sitting on that front porch, rocking slowly, a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the sunrise. She didn't say a word, just nodded to the empty chair beside her and the steamin' mug on the small table between them. I sat down, took that first sip of what would turn out to be the best coffee I'd ever tasted, and something strange happened. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the knot in my chest loosen just a little bit. My Henry used to say the world always looks more manageable after watching it wake up, she said after a while. Your husband? I asked. She nodded. 43 years together before the Lord called him home 5 years ago. Every single morning, rain or shine, we'd sit right here and greet the day together. I noticed a certain sadness in her voice, but there was something else too, a kind of peaceful acceptance that I couldn't quite understand at my young age. Vietnam, she asked suddenly, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. I shifted uncomfortably. How'd you know? The way you flinched at the backfrin truck yesterday. The way you scan rooms before entering. The nightmares. She glanced at me then. These old walls ain't as thick as they used to be. I felt my face go hot with embarrassment. I'm sorry if I disturbed you, ma'am. No need for apologies, son. My Henry came back from Korea with his own set of ghosts. Some wounds don't bleed, but they're just as real as any bullet hole. For some reason, that simple acknowledgement from this stranger hit me harder than any therapy session the VA had put me through. Before I knew it, words were pouring out of me like water through a broken dam, things I hadn't told anyone, not even my own family. The things I'd seen. The friends I'd lost. The guilt I carried for surviving when they hadn't. Miss Eleanor just listened, rockin' gently, those weathered hands wrapped around her coffee mug. When I finally ran out of words, the sun was fully up, and I felt lighter than I had in years. You know what Henry would say, she finally spoke. He'd say that sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is learn how to live in peacetime. That week stretched into 2 as Frank had trouble getting parts for my truck. By the 3rd week, I wasn't in such a hurry anymore. I found work helping Doc Williams with some renovations on his clinic in town. The physical labor felt good, honest. And every morning, Miss Eleanor and I would sit on that porch, drinking coffee, sometimes talking, sometimes just being quiet together. In the evenings, we'd sit out there again, watching the sunset. Sometimes she'd tell me stories about Henry, about their life together, about the daughter they lost to polio back in '47. Sometimes I'd tell her about my dreams before the war, how I'd wanted to be a teacher someday. So why don't you, she asked one evening in late July, the fireflies just starting to dance in the yard. Why don't I what? Be a teacher. War's behind you. Future's ahead. What's stopping you? I didn't have a good answer for that. The thought of staying in one place, putting down roots, it scared me more than any firefight ever had. What if I failed? What if the nightmares never went away? What if I wasn't the man I used to be anymore? August came, and my truck was finally fixed. I packed my few belongings, paid Miss Eleanor what I owed her, and promised to write. I meant it too, at the time. I made it about 5 miles out of town before turning the truck around. Something just didn't feel right about leaving. I told myself it was just to thank her properly, maybe bring her some flowers for all her kindness. When I pulled back into her driveway, she was sitting on that porch, rocking away, like she'd been expecting me all along. College starts in 3 weeks, she said without preamble. State University's only 30 miles from here. Room's yours if you want it. And just like that, my life found its new direction. The next 4 years, I lived in that attic room, driving to classes during the week, working odd jobs on weekends. Miss Eleanor, who eventually became just Eleanor to me, helped me study, listened to my practice lectures, and never once let me give up when courses got tough. Every morning and every evening, when I was home, we'd sit on that porch. Through rain, through snow, through the heat of summer. It became our ritual, our sanctuary. She'd knit her shell peas or just rock, and I'd read her grade papers or just be still. The porch became more than just a place, it became a feeling, a state of mind. I graduated with honors in 1969 and got offered a teaching position right there at Willow Creek High School. By then, the thought of leaving Eleanor and that porch was unthinkable. I built myself a small cabin on the back of her property, though I still spent most evenings on that front porch with her. Life settled into a rhythm. I taught history to teenagers who reminded me so much of myself at their age. Some days were harder than others, the war memories never completely faded, but they became more manageable. Eleanor's wisdom helped me navigate the rough patches, and that porch became my therapy couch, my confessor's booth, my thinking spot. You need to start courting that pretty librarian, Eleanor announced one evening in 1971. I nearly choked on my lemonade. Margaret? She wouldn't look twice at someone like me. Eleanor snorted. I've seen the way she looks at you when you bring those books back late every week. Nobody's that interested in overdue fees, James Everett. 2 weeks later, I finally worked up the courage to ask Margaret for coffee. A year after that, Eleanor helped me plan the proposal. When Margaret said yes, the first person I wanted to tell was Eleanor, and we celebrated, where else? On that front porch, with some of Henry's old whiskey that she'd been savon for a special occasion. Margaret and I built our house just down the road. Close enough to visit daily, far enough to give a newly married couple their privacy. Eleanor insisted on it. Our son Henry was born in 1974, followed by our daughter Eleanor Ellie, we called her, in 1976. Those children grew up knowing that Porch as well as their own rooms. Every Sunday after church, we'd have dinner at Grandma Elle's, as they called her, though she wasn't really their grandmother by blood. Afterwards, the adults would sit on the porch while the kids played in the yard. Some of my fondest memories are of those Sunday afternoons, the smell of Eleanor's apple pie still lingering in the air, the sound of my children's laughter mix in with the creaking of those old rocking chairs. Eleanor aged gracefully, but age she did. By the mid-80s, her health started to decline. Margaret and I offered to have her move in with us, but she refused. I promised Henry I'd wait for him right here, she said stubbornly. This is where he'll look for me when my time comes. Instead, we took turns staying with her. I'd sit with her on the porch every morning before school, and Margaret would come by in the afternoons. The children, teenagers by then, would stop by after school, fill in her quiet house with their teenage drama and energy, which she secretly loved. In the spring of 1987, on an unusually warm April evening, Eleanor and I sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. It's nearly time, she said suddenly, her voice softer than usual. For what? I asked, though something in my heart already knew. For me to join Henry. She reached over and patted my hand. Don't you look so worried, James. I've been waiting for this reunion for 27 years. I started to protest, to tell her not to talk that way, but she shushed me. I need you to promise me something, she continued. This house, this porch, it helped heal you when you needed it most. I've seen it do the same for others over the years. I want you to keep it standing. Keep it open for whoever needs its magic next. I promised her, though my throat was tight with unshed tears. The next morning, I found her in her bed, peaceful as could be, a smile on her face like she'd just heard some wonderful news. The doctor said she went in her sleep, the easiest way to go. I knew better. Eleanor Winters had simply decided it was time to keep her promise to Henry. The house passed to me, as per her will. Margaret and I debated selling our place and moving in, but something told me that wasn't what Eleanor had meant. Instead, we kept it as a kind of memorial, a sanctuary. I never missed a morning or evening on that porch. Sometimes Margaret would join me, sometimes the kids, but often I'd sit alone, talking to Eleanor and Henry as if they could hear me. Maybe they could. Then came the fall of 1990. I was heading home from school when I noticed a young woman sitting on the steps of the town's small bus station. Couldn't have been more than 20, with a small child sleeping against her shoulder and another on the way, judging by her swollen belly. She was crying quietly, trying not to wake her little one. Something about her reminded me of myself all those years ago, lost, alone, at the end of hope. Before I knew what I was doing, I pulled over. Her name was Sarah. Her husband had left her when he found out about the second baby. She was heading to her cousin's in California but had run out of money for the rest of the trip. The cousin couldn't send any cash for at least 2 weeks. I've got a place you can stay, I heard myself saying. No strings attached. Just a safe spot until you figure out your next move. That's how Sarah and little Tommy became the first in a long line of temporary residents at Eleanor's house. Some stayed a few days, some a few months. A teenager kicked out for being different. A man newly released from prison with nowhere to go. A family who lost everything in a house fire. The rules were simple: respect the house, help with chores, and sit on the porch at least once a day, preferably at sunrise or sunset. It was non-negotiable. Over the years, I watched countless lives transform on that porch. Something about the rhythm of those rocking chairs, the view of the changing sky, the stillness of simply being, it worked a kind of magic that all my years of teaching history couldn't explain. I never charged rent, though most insisted on contributing something: vegetables from the garden they usually ended up planting, repairs to the aging house, homemade meals, or simply their stories. I kept a journal of everyone who passed through, what brought them there, and where they went after. Eleanor would have loved that. Margaret thought I was crazy at first, bringing strangers into Eleanor's precious house. But after seeing the change in Sarah, who ended up staying in Willow Creek, opening a small bakery that's still running to this day, she understood. She became my partner in what the townspeople started calling Professor Jim's porch therapy. Our children grew up, went to college, started families of their own. They'd bring the grandkids back for visits, and I'd tell them stories about Eleanor and Henry and the magic of the porch. I wanted them to understand that sometimes, healing doesn't happen in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, it happens in the quiet spaces between words, in the gentle rhythm of a rocking chair, in the simple act of witnessing the world wake up or go to sleep. The years passed faster than I could believe. Margaret slipped away in her sleep in 2010, much like Eleanor had. I buried her in the cemetery next to Eleanor and Henry, knowing in my heart they would look after her until I could join them. My son wanted me to move in with him after that, worried about his old man living alone. But I couldn't leave the porch. I had promised Eleanor. I'm waiting, I told him. Just like Eleanor waited for Henry. For what, Dad? He asked. I couldn't quite explain it then. I just knew there was one more person who needed to find that porch before my time was up. In the summer of 2015, exactly 50 years after I first stumbled onto Eleanor's porch, I was sitting in my usual spot when a beat-up car pulled into the driveway. A young man got out, looking as lost as I must have looked all those years ago. Military haircut, haunted eyes, the stiff way he held himself that screamed recently discharged. Sir, he called out hesitantly. I was told in town you might have a room available? I smiled, feeling a circle closing that had been open for half a century. Depends, I called back. You running from something or to something, son? He blinked in surprise, then a small smile cracked his serious expression. Guess I don't rightly know the answer to that yet. I patted the empty rocker beside me. Well, at least you're honest. Come on up and sit a spell. Coffee's hot, and I've got a story you might want to hear. And so here I am, 40 years after making a promise to an old woman who saved my life with nothing more than a porch, some coffee, and the wisdom to know that sometimes, the best healing happens in stillness. I'm 85 now. My hands are gnarled, my back is bent, but every morning, I make my way out to this porch. Every evening, I watch the sunset from this same spot. I've been waiting, you see. Waiting like Eleanor waited for Henry. That young veteran from 5 years ago? He's teaching history at the high school now. Lives in the cabin out back that I built all those years ago. Married a nurse from the VA clinic in the next town over. They're expecting their first child this fall. He sits with me most mornings. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. The magic of the porch doesn't require words. I've been feeling tired lately. A good tired, like after a day of honest work. The kind of tired that tells you it might be time to rest soon. I've made my arrangements. The house will pass to him, with the same stipulation Eleanor gave me, keep it standing, keep it open for whoever needs its healing next. So if you're ever passing through Willow Creek, and you see an old house with a front porch that looks like it's seen a lifetime of sunrises and sunsets, stop by. There'll be someone sitting there in a rocking chair, waiting to ask if you're running from something or to something. And no matter your answer, there'll be an empty chair waiting just for you. Because sometimes, all we need is a porch to sit on, a horizon to watch, and the time to let our souls catch up with all the living we've done. That's what Eleanor taught me, all those years ago. And that's the legacy I'm leaving behind, one sunrise, one sunset, one porch sitting at a time. You know, there's something I haven't told you yet, something about that porch that makes it special beyond just the memories. When I first arrived at Eleanor's, I noticed these curious little carvings along the railing. Nothing fancy, just small marks and symbols that looked like they'd been there forever. One quiet afternoon, about 3 weeks into my stay, I finally asked her about them. Eleanor's eyes lit up like she'd been waiting for me to notice. Each one's a story, she said, running her weathered fingers over a small crescent moon carved into the wood. Henry started it the day after our wed-in. Said a home should tell its own history. She showed me around the porch then, pointing out different markers. The crescent moon was from their first night as husband and wife. A small star when they learned they were expecting their daughter. A tiny bird the spring after they lost her. A mountain range when Henry returned from Korea. Dozens of small symbols, each one a chapter in their lives. Whenever something important happened, good or bad, we'd come out here and add to our story, she explained. Helped us remember that no moment stands alone. Every joy, every sorrow, they're all connected, all part of the same long tale. The day before I left for college, Eleanor handed me a small carving knife. Your turn, she said simply. I carved a tiny book, my hand shaken with the weight of what it represented, a new chapter, a second chance. That tradition continued through the years. When I got my teaching job, I added a small desk. When I proposed to Margaret, a little heart joined the collection. 2 cradles appeared when our children were born. A tearful night after Eleanor passed, I carefully etched a rocking chair beside Henry's mountain range. Every person who stayed at the house was invited to leave their mark before they left. Some were hesitant at first, who were they to add to this family history? But that was precisely Eleanor's gift, making people understand they were part of something larger than themselves, that their story mattered too. Sarah carved a phoenix when she opened her bakery. The teenage boy who'd been thrown out added a door stand and open. The ex-con carved a set of broken chains the day he was hired full-time at the lumber yard. A collection of strangers' lives, all connected by one wooden porch. The townspeople started noticing those carvings, and something wonderful happened. Folks who'd never set foot on the porch would stop by just to see the latest additions. They'd sit a spell, share some coffee, tell their own stories. The porch became a living record of Willow Creek itself. There was the summer of '94 when the river flooded, and half the town stayed at Eleanor's place while their homes dried out. We ran out of room on the Ryland and started carving on the floorboards, tiny waves in boats and helping hands. There was old Doc Williams, who'd patch up scrapes and set broken bones for 30 years before retiring. Never spent a night at the house but would stop by every Thursday afternoon like clockwork. He carved a small medical bag the day he turned his practice over to his daughter. There was the year the high school basketball team made it to state finals for the first time ever. Those boys came by the night before they left for the tournament. Each one carved a small sneaker for luck. They didn't win, but they played their hearts out, and those sneakers stayed as a reminder that some victories don't come with trophies. The porch Ryland got so full eventually that we had to replace some of the wood. I carefully removed the original pieces, cataloged every symbol, and mounted them inside the house like precious artifacts. The new Ryland filled up just as quick. It seemed the more stories that Porch collected, the more folks wanted to add theirs. In the late 90s, a young woman from the community college came by, asked if she could document the carvings for a local history project. Spent the whole summer photographing every inch of that porch, interviewing me about the stories behind each symbol. That project turned into a small museum exhibit in the county library, which then caught the attention of a publisher in Chicago. Next thing I knew, the storytelling porch, community and healing in small-town America was being featured in magazines and newspapers. People started coming from neighboring towns, then neighboring states, just to see this ordinary porch that had somehow become extraordinary. I worried that all this attention would change the magic of the place. But Eleanor had built something stronger than fame. Those visitors either understood the spirit of the porch right away or they didn't stay long. The ones who got it often ended up sitting 4 hours, sometimes coming back with their own struggles and stories. There was a family from Minnesota who'd lost their son in Afghanistan. They drove 14 hours after reading about the porch in some magazine. Didn't call ahead, just showed up one evening as the sun was going down. "We don't know what we're looking for," the father said, his voice breaking. "Just had to come." They stayed for 4 days. Barely spoke the first 2. By the third morning, the mother started telling stories about her boy, funny things he'd done as a child, his dreams, his laugh. The father joined in by the afternoon. On the 4th day, they carved a small soldier's helmet on the Ryland, right next to my Vietnam symbol from decades earlier. "We haven't been able to talk about him since the funeral," the mother told me as they were leaving. Somehow this place made it possible. That's when I truly understood what Eleanor had created and tasked me with protecting. This wasn't just a place for my healing or even for the town's benefit. This porch had become a kind of sacred space where grief could transform into something bearable, where joy could be witnessed and multiplied, where the simple act of sitting still could reveal what was needed next. The young veteran who joined me 5 years ago, his name's Michael, by the way, he took to the tradition immediately. His first carvin was a broken compass. Last year, he added a whole schoolhouse after earning his teachin' certificate. Michael started collecting the stories too. He records everything in a leather-bound journal Eleanor gave me years ago that I never got around to using. I catch him sometimes, late in the evening, writin' by lamplight, preservin' the tales I've told him 100 times, addin' new ones as they unfold. Last Christmas, the whole town gathered on and around that porch for a special celebration. The mayor, Sarah's oldest boy, if you can believe it, declared December 21st Eleanor Winters Day in Willow Creek. They unveiled a small bronze plaque at the bottom of the porch steps that reads, "Where healing happens one sitting at a time." Margaret would have loved that ceremony. She always said Eleanor deserved some kind of monument. Not that Eleanor would have wanted one, she was never one for drawing attention to herself. But I think she would have appreciated how many lives were represented there that day, how many people stood a little taller because they'd spent time in one of her rocking chairs. I'd been thinking lately about what made Eleanor different. She wasn't the only kind person in Willow Creek. She wasn't the only one willing to open her home to a stranger. But she had this gift for seeing beyond the surface of a person, for recognizing pain without needing to fix it right away. She understood something most folks never learn, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another person is simply the space to be exactly as they are, exactly where they are. No judgment, no rush to solutions, just presence and patience. That's what the porch provides, I think. A place where time slows down just enough for a soul to catch its breath. In a world that's always pushing us to move faster, to be better, to do more, this old wooden porch stubbornly insists on stillness, on the healing power of watching shadows lengthen across floorboards worn smooth by generations of restless feet finally coming to rest. There's science behind it, I suppose. Michael's wife Amy, the nurse I mentioned, she's explained to me how stress hormones drop when you're in a peaceful environment, how the rhythm of rockin' can steady a racing heart, how watching a horizon line can reset an anxious mind. But I prefer to think of it as something closer to magic or perhaps faith. A reminder that sometimes the answer isn't in doing more, but in being still enough to hear the whispers of what's already there. I've had my share of dark nights on this porch, don't get me wrong. Nights after Eleanor passed when I railed against God for talking her. Nights after Vietnam nightmares when the memories felt fresher than yesterday. The terrible week after we lost Margaret, when I couldn't imagine how the sun could dare to rise again without her in the world to see it. But something about sitting in the same spot, watching the same view that's witnessed all those generations of joy and sorrow before mine, it puts things in perspective. The old oak that stood sentinel by the driveway for over 100 years, the mountains in the distance that have watched civilizations rise and fall, the stars overhead that burned bright long before any of us arrived and will continue long after we're gone. Eleanor used to say, the porch remembers what we forget, that we're just passing through, but the story keeps going, but I think that's why I've stayed. Not just because I promised her, but because I needed that reminder. That my pain, my joy, my small life, they're all just threads in a much larger tapestry. Important threads, to be sure, but made meaningful by their connection to all the others. The young folks today, they're always rushing somewhere, always connected to those little screens in their hands. I don't blame them, the world moves at a different pace now. But I worry sometimes that they're missing something essential. The kind of wisdom that can only come from sitting still, from watching the light change over a familiar landscape, from listening to the silence between words. That's why I make sure every visitor to the porch puts away their phone for at least one sunrise or sunset. The world can wait, I tell them. This moment won't. Most resist at first. They get fidgety, their fingers twitching for something to swipe or tap. But give it 15 minutes, and you can almost see it happen, that moment when their shoulders drop, their breathing slows, and they truly arrive on the porch. That's when the magic can begin. I remember one young woman, couldn't have been more than 22, who showed up last spring. College student from the city, working on some psychology paper about rural communities and resilience. Came armed with a voice recorder, a laptop, and about 100 questions. I only have 2 hours, she informed me briskly. I need to understand how this porch therapy thing works. I just smiled and pointed to the empty rocker. 2 hours is plenty. Have a seat. She sat down with her notebook ready, pen poised to record my wisdom. But I didn't say a word. Just rocked gently, nodded toward the evening sky where the first stars were just beginning to appear. She tried to wait me out at first, then started to skin questions that I answered with the briefest responses possible. After about 20 minutes of this, she put down her notebook with an exasperated sigh. This isn't very productive, she complained. Depends on what you're trying to produce, I replied. She stayed the full 2 hours, and by the end, she was rocking in rhythm with me, her eyes fixed on the darkening horizon, her questions forgotten. She came back the next day without her recorder or notebook. Stayed a week, in fact. Her paper probably suffered, but something in her healed. Before she left, she carved a small question mark that gradually curved into a solid period. I came looking for answers, she told me, but found something better: how to sit with the questions. That's the porch's secret, if it has one. Not that it provides answers, but that it creates a space where the right questions can emerge. Where the constant noise of modern life fades enough for a person to hear their own heart again. I've had marriage proposals happen on this porch and divorce conversations too. I've witnessed births. Amy delivered her and Michael's first child right here last summer when the baby came too quick to get to the hospital, and sat with the dying. Eleanor insisted on spending her last few conscious hours in her rocker, watching one final sunset. This porch has absorbed tears of grief so profound I thought they might stay in the wood permanently. It's also hosted celebrations so joyful the whole structure seemed to vibrate with laughter. Through it all, these old boards have held steady, offering whatever was needed in the moment: stability, witness, memory, hope. As for me, well, I'm in my sunset years now. Each morning when I make my way out here, coffee mug in hand, joints protesting the effort, I wonder if this will be my last sunrise on Eleanor's porch. Not in a morbid way, mind you. More like a grateful acknowledgement that nothing, not even beloved traditions, lasts forever. I've lived a good, long life, far longer and richer than that lost young man who stumbled onto this porch half a century ago could have imagined. I've loved deeply, taught hundreds of children, watched a community heal and grow. I've kept my promise to Eleanor, and in doing so, found my own purpose. Michael understands the legacy he's inheriting. I see it in the way he treats everyone who finds their way to our porch, in how he's already teaching his little girl the stories behind each carving, in his patient presence with those who arrive broken and confused. Life has a way of coming full circle if yo.